Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today we are focusing on how licensure candidates can work with their supervisors to navigate the AXP process. I'm Jeremy Fretz, Assistant Vice President of Experience and Education here at NCARB, and I'm joined by three experts. Very excited to have them here today. We have AXP Supervisor Joseph McCoy in the center. We have licensure candidate Haley DiNardo, and we have licensing advisor Kimberly Tuttle. And I'm going to invite each of them to tell us a little bit more about themselves so that you can know who they are and as you think about the questions you might want to ask. Starting with Haley.
Hi, I'm Haley. I'm an architectural intern at Niles Bolton Associates, and I'm an associate AI member, so I'm on the path to licensure currently, and I'm also a director on the National Architecture Accreditation Board.
My name is Joseph McCoy. I am a senior associate at Sanchez Palmer Architects, also president-elect of the Northern Virginia chapter, American Institute of Architects, and have been a supervisor for a number of years, multiple licensure candidates, as well as a mentor to licensure candidates outside of my office.
My name is Kimberly Tuttle. I'm the Director of Partnerships and Events at the American Institute of Architecture students. I am also the AIADC Architect Licensing Advisor, and I hold that position because I also held the AIA Maine Licensing Advisor position back in 2011.
Yes, and you also have another role at somewhere else, right?
Yes, I am also a new adjunct faculty member at the University of the District of Columbia, so that's a great experience.
So we were laughing earlier that we have all of the architectural organizations in the United States represented, from NCARB to NAB to AIA to AIAS to ACSA through a faculty member. So that's fun for us to have all those covered somewhat accidentally. Thank you all for being here with us. We've had some great conversation while we were waiting for you all to join us live, and I think it's going to be a really great hour. So whether you are a student just starting the AXP, a candidate trying to improve your work relationship with your supervisor, or a supervisor trying to become familiar with the AXP, this webinar will have something for you. And those are the very topics on which we invite you to submit questions for these fine panelists. Developing new resources for AXP supervisors is a priority for NCARB this year. It's a high priority and a personal passion for our president, Terry Aller, so we're really focused on that this year. So submit to us your questions that we can answer live and maybe follow up on later as well through the chat tool on your screen, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. If you need to sign off early, you can watch the full webinar later on our YouTube channel. As for myself, we've heard from these folks. I also bring a little bit of experience from the supervising world. I practiced architecture for 22 years and had several candidates myself. Now, we talk about a supervisor, and I think it's important for us to first define what that word means as we use it here at NCARB. As we use the term, your supervisor is the architect who has direct day-to-day supervision of your work. You might have other mentors or advisors or folks who are in charge of you at a higher level, but your supervisor should be very familiar with your work product on a day-to-day basis. We also like to emphasize the role that ethics plays in forming the foundation of a supervisor's responsibility. Our colleagues at AIA have been doing some great work on developing resources and expectations for ethical behavior in the profession. So we often refer folks to the AIA Code of Ethics. It is the broadly accepted standard across the United States, whether you're a member of AIA or not. So I would encourage everyone to take a few minutes and read through the AIA Code of Ethics, as well as their guides for ethical practice, if you've not done so. Now, one of the things that you might not know of as you think about ethics is that the AIA Code of Ethics actually addresses supervision. And it does it in several key ways. We'll just quickly touch on three, and then we'll start talking with our panelists. The first is that supervisors are expected to assure that those they are supervising also abide by the Code of Ethics. Second, AIA members are expected to treat their colleagues and employees with respect and provide an equitable working environment. And the third one is perhaps most relevant immediately to the world of supervision and AXP, and that is that members are obligated to assist in the proper and timely documentation for licensure candidates participating in an experience program like AXP. In addition to the AIA Code of Ethics, your local jurisdiction may have its own similar code or expectations for supervisors. So it's always good to make sure you're aware of the local requirements. So that's one aspect of how a supervisor and a candidate should work together in their work relationship. But I'd like to ask our guests now, what would each of you say is a crucial element for building a positive working relationship with your candidates? And I'll let you start for us, Haley.
Okay, I think one of the most important things for an effective relationship between you and your supervisor is having a great communication channel. So having open and clear communication so that you feel comfortable to go to them with any questions or requests that you might have, but also that they're comfortable coming to you as well. Everything about this whole thing, a supervisor and someone gaining licensure, is about both people being comfortable and sharing information.
Great. Joe?
Yeah, I'll build on that because the communication piece really is critical, but I think a special role that the supervisor has is to be aware that the process can be a little intimidating for the person going through, for the licensure candidate. And part of our job as supervisors should be to anticipate some of the issues, questions that are going to come up, and proactively look for ways to engage the candidate, and not always wait for the candidate to be the person to do so.
Yeah, and I would just follow up with what Haley was saying. Don't be afraid to ask questions. I personally don't think there are any stupid questions, although I have had question quotas, like no more questions today. So be respectful of your supervisor and how many times you approach them, but maybe, talk with your supervisor about how they want to go about handling questions, kind of keep a running tab at your desk, here are all the questions I have, and then set a time to sit down with your supervisor and be able to get those questions answered. Because something I've learned through teaching, particularly this semester, is that there are a lot of things that we take for granted and as second nature. And for me, working with first-year architecture students, I forgot that they don't even know how to properly cut materials. So, teaching them, proper cutting techniques and using an X-Acto knife, that's something that I wouldn't have thought about until I started to see them struggle. So don't be afraid to ask questions, because that is exactly what we're here to do for you.
I remember, that's really important to remember. The terms and processes that people in practice have become familiar with may still be completely foreign to licensure candidates. And a lot of those licensure candidates are coming from an environment where maybe they've been focused on testing and on learning the right answer and having the right answer, and now they're, they've graduated, they have a degree, they feel like they're supposed to be ready to do this. I certainly did. And I certainly felt like I should be ready to do this, but there's so much still to be learned, and that's what the AXP process is to help you fill in those gaps and to learn. We have one of our first questions actually jumps to a situation where a licensure candidate may have worked with a supervisor and then returned to school. So Kevin asks us, as an AXP supervisor for an intern that has since returned to school, what is the most effective strategy I can pursue to be of assistance? It's a very different dynamic than an in-person discussion.
I'll take a stab at it. So I think I've been through this situation before where you're in school, you do your internship, and then you go back to school. So I think having communication that can stay open is a wonderful thing, and having people that can continue to be your mentor is great. I think from a supervisor perspective, you might be able to offer different things. So maybe you can check their resume to help them, or you can better define what hours they need or what they could work on at school, so that when they come back to the practice, they can fine-tune what it is they want to look at and what hours they want to get. I think continuing that mentorship is really important, and then also inviting them to come back if you enjoyed them and having them work on their hours again with you.
And I might chime in, and I'm not 100% sure which direction he was going with that, but never leave your summer internship without getting your hours signed off on. So always plan, even from if you're a supervisor and you know your candidate is leaving, or if you are a licensure candidate, make sure you schedule time to sit down with that person to make sure you review their hours, because it is much, much harder to get someone to sign off on your hours once you've left that firm. And I know that, Jeremy, you probably run into people who have that issue quite a bit. Working with students exclusively at the AIS, and a lot of our students are very tech savvy, and so I think being able to have video conferencing with them can still provide a somewhat similar face-to-face.
Yeah, I'll add one last piece to that, which is the network building that licensure candidates do starts already with the time when they leave their first firm, even if it's a summer job. And so encouraging them to maintain contact with you. If you were their supervisor, now you can transition into more of a mentorship role. But really encouraging them to use this as the first step in network building. I still maintain contact with students who were students at the time they worked in my office, have gone on to finish school and are now at other offices. And so mentorship does not have to be only in one form. It could certainly be through email, remotely. And it can last for as many years as you want to. And it's a good way just to remind yourself and the candidate that the profession is big and certainly larger than a single office.
Yeah, and we applaud Kevin, who asked that question, for being proactive in and participating on an extended basis with that candidate. That's what we like to hear. One other thing that I'll throw in as sort of a pro tip is that keep in mind, everyone, supervisors and licensure candidates, that the AXP reports go to the email address that you have on file with NCARB, and in some cases that's a personal email address that's checked less often. So if you're worried that your supervisor hasn't responded, you might just ask them if they've received that email from NCARB, and they may need to look in a different inbox. So, little pro tip, insider tip there. We have a question from Nelson, and it's a technical question, so I will field this one. How much time does my supervisor have to approve my reported hours? And the answer is, first of all, Nelson, don't be concerned. Once you have submitted your hours, that gets them in on the clock at the right time for your reporting purposes. Your supervisor actually does not have a limit on that time, other than the aforementioned ethical responsibility to review them in a timely manner. So we would hope that they're doing that within a week or two at the outset. All right, so we have, go ahead.
Now, Jeremy, there may be a related question that comes up later, but we'll go ahead and hit it now, is that the responsibility that the supervisor has in this role is to not let the first time you're seeing these reported information be the report that you get invited to through NCARB. I think really you should already know what's in that report. There should be no question, so that the review is not a verification hour by hour, but really just a cursory check that everything is still in order. And that goes to some of the other issues of communication, simply being aware of what your licensure candidate is doing. But that really does fall onto the supervisor, is to say, I need to know what's going on, not rely on the report as my sole information source.
Right. And we also encourage supervisors and their candidates to meet and talk regularly about their progress through the program and what other experience areas that they need to be gaining exposure to. So we have a question now from Kelly. Kelly says, hello. As a part-time intern working while continuing my undergraduate professional degree, what is the best way to get an even spread of hours across the different areas, here's the catch, in a 20-hour work schedule, 20-hour-a-week schedule?
First of all, I commend you for working and going to school. And I think your studio projects will probably be that much better for it. So I commend you for that. That's tricky.
I think some of that kind of falls back to the communication that we've all been talking about. I think if you're at a firm that is supporting you and they know that you're in school as well, I think having a conversation about what you're hoping to get out of that would be really helpful. So if you're really trying to get an even spread of hours, then you should have that conversation with your supervisor. But there's also different ways to think about it. Just because you're working part-time, you may not need an even spread of hours since you'll have time to work in other areas. So it's okay that they're not evenly spread amongst the 6 categories, but if that's something you're looking for personally, then I would have that conversation with your supervisor.
And I would also piggyback off of that. If you're getting hours in categories that might be a little harder to achieve later on, you might want to actually take advantage of being really specific and getting those hours, because some firms may not offer that sort of opportunity later on, or it might be a little harder to get. So whenever you can, take advantage of some of the tasks that are a little more rare for emerging professionals.
Great. So we have a question from Linda. I work in a government setting. I've been told my supervisor chain of command tell me they would sign off on my hours, but have not. How open are architectural and engineering firms to have me gain hours through them? I'm interested in adding an employer just to get the last 600 to 700 hours signed off on. So, anyone want to tackle that one? I have a thought. My thought is if you're just asking if an architectural engineering firm would hire you, I would say right now is a great time. Right now there are lots of firms that are hiring folks and looking for opportunities. But I would encourage you to try and get the hours that you've already accumulated signed off on, and politely encourage that person or others up the chain of command, if appropriate, to get that taken care of for you.
Yeah, and maybe asking why or what can I do to help assist in getting this taken care of? Can I review my hours with you so it's not as big of a, as you said, can we talk about this first so that maybe it's not as intimidating to go in and sign off online, but maybe there's a reason that they haven't done it, and so maybe trying to have that conversation with them might open up a reason that you hadn't expected.
And emphasizing that this is a requirement of your licensure path. This is not a hobby. This is part of your process of becoming a licensed architect.
Jeremy, I don't know if this is exactly what the question is dealing with, but it opens up a couple of thoughts that I've had. And certainly if you are in a job and you realize that the opportunities to be able to work in the areas that you need to get the experience, if those are not going to be there in that job, you'll know that fairly soon as you get more experience. So I guess initially you concentrate on the areas that are available to you. Once you get to the point where you need to progress further and that's not an option, that's kind of the sign that it's maybe time to look for something else. Second part of that, though, is it is tough to not be impatient in the beginning of your career. We were mentioning this earlier. Now a little later in my career, like years seem to go by with me not noticing it, but initially there's a real interest to get your experience as quickly as possible or get that license right away. And it's kind of a common thought among architects that it takes a number of years before you even have a general idea of what's going on. So I guess the other advice would be patient. It doesn't have to happen right away, and it does take time. Certainly getting your license is not the end goal. It's really the start of the rest of your career. And so I guess if the doors are closed to you in a certain place, certainly look for an open area elsewhere. But if it looks like it's going to happen 6 months from now and not right now, that's probably okay.
So I actually have an answer that I have given to a couple of folks on this, and I'd actually be interested to hear if anyone in the audience has had this experience. But I've been asked by candidates who have moved on to working in a construction firm or an engineering firm, become very successful in that firm, very highly valued in the organization, but haven't finished their hours under a licensed architect. And the response I suggested to them is that they could even, if they're valued by their company and their company wants them to, progress and get their license, they might even talk about, a leave of absence to go work somewhere and then come back. And, certainly if you're working at a very large national, international construction firm, they have plenty of architect friends who would probably be happy to hire you.
Yeah, I think I have one other thing to add to that. I think because the question touched on architectural engineering as another option, I think it's important to note that when you're logging all of your hours for AXP, you have the option to log them under several different settings. So if all of your hours so far have been under the A setting, you might have the opportunity to have another licensed professional sign off on O setting hours. So that's another opportunity to maybe close that 500-600 hour gap that you have.
Yes. Well done. Well said. She's not even on the payroll. But we do take a look at those other experiences and the detailed requirements. There may be opportunities for you there. Those are all in our AXP guidelines. So I have a question for Kimberly, this especially coming back at us from Kevin. So if you remember our friend Kevin from a few minutes ago, he's mentoring someone who's gone back to school and back in the classroom. Does mentorship extend into being a sounding board for their assignments? I do not want to tread on the toes of the professors.
I think that's a great idea. I think it'll only serve to make their projects better. I know when I was interning and then going back to school, every time I worked, my projects just got, that much better. And I think that particularly when I'm working with first years, I notice that they're still a little afraid to, they think somebody's going to steal their idea. So they haven't really started talking to each other. So I think being a sounding board is I think you were doing wonders for that student. So I think that's wonderful.
I'd say too, for any supervisors who live or work in the area of an architecture school, go there if you can. I'm fortunate enough to work close to an extension of Virginia Tech's architecture school in Alexandria, and there's been often times when, even without a formal invitation, you're working with a student, licensure candidate who's interning in the office for a period of months while they're still in school, and you have the opportunity to go over. So that's an instant connection of the profession to the academic world. Students see other people coming in who are not their professors. It starts to build the relationship of school and the profession are just two parts of the same thing, not two worlds that you need to bridge somehow. And it's also great for me as a supervisor. Right? Sometimes you can get a little disconnected from what students are going through if you haven't done it for a while. That's a good way to instantly reconnect and just be aware of what they are learning, what they're dealing with, what their goals are for the next thing to learn.
And we are always looking for guest critics.
You're teaching first year studio now. I actually sat in on a first semester class that a friend of mine is teaching last week, and it was great fun to go way back in time.
It's really great to have, for me, we have 18 students in our class and I'm the sole faculty person. So it's nice to have those guest jurors on there because it also provides me a little more context for their projects. So it's not just, just like when you work on an architecture project, it's not just you. You are not the only one designing, so yeah.
So we had a follow-up question. I'm going to spin it a little bit because it hits on an area that I think is sometimes a question. Someone was asking, I'm reporting my hours in setting O. What happens if I don't find a supervisor in setting A for completing my hours within the 5-year time frame? So I want to clarify the 5-year time frame. There are really 2 5-year time frames in the world of NCARB in the AXP process to be aware of. In ARE, you have your 5-year rolling clock with respect to your passing exams. But that is separate. That if you're passing your exams, you can in most jurisdictions complete the exams before you've completed your experience. So in the experience reporting world, there's not really a 5-year limit. There's a 5-year limit on on reporting old hours, so hours that are in the past. But if you're keeping your reports current on the hours you're working, there is no 5-year limit on reporting. There's no timeline that you're fighting against there for reporting experience hours. But we would encourage you to find the opportunity to work in setting A, to work under a licensed architect, and get those hours under your belt. So we have a question that I will pose to you all, which is, what are some best practices? I'm going to say the question is, what are the best practices for logging hours under setting O, which I think they mean, by which I think they mean, what are the good opportunities for getting those other non-architectural experiences? So do you all have any thoughts on that and any experience? You're smiling. I think you might.
Go for it.
I feel like we should just, Jeremy could just read from the.
I could just read from the AXP guidelines in setting O.
But that's like under licensed engineers, other licensed practitioners. I mean, I think there are a lot of opportunities. At the AIAS, we're actually working on a career, a partnership with SMACNA, so the sheet metal industry, and getting our students into sheet metal fabrication labs to start understanding how materials actually go together. So I think, you know, depending on what that company looks like and their structure and who they have on board, potentially could be a really great opportunity for students to think outside the box and learn other skills that will help enhance their education and understand how buildings go together better.
Right. And also freedom by design is another one that
Is that under O?
is under O.
Yeah, and also under O is anything, if you serve on a board for AIS, or you're involved in AIS activities, or you do construction tours with your student group at school, those can go towards your O setting. And then obviously the engineers that are related to our fields, those can be used.
And then community-based design centers
Community-based
as well.
design centers, that's actually how Freedom by Design falls into that category. And construction work as well. And so make sure to look at the list of how many hours you can earn in each of those categories that's broken out clearly in the AXP guidelines.
So one on the construction side that comes to mind also, because we have this in Northern Virginia represented across the country, Habitat for Humanity is a good option. And sort of because of the model that they use too, they are a little bit more open to plugging people in for shorter periods of time or odd periods. So it's not a multi-year commitment, because it tends to be based on individual housing projects or a phase of that project. And you're always working with expert supervisors, everything from on-site construction to in-office project management. And that's a way to get the same kind of experience that you might otherwise only be able to get with a general contractor, but maybe without the longer-term commitment. You can do it over a summer, or if you're a student, you can do it also while you're in school. So, I know several students in our area have taken advantage of that with Habitat for Humanity Northern Virginia, and I'm sure other areas would welcome the same.
Right. And the other thing that is some people don't know about setting A is that if you are working internationally, if you're working in a foreign country outside the United States, then if you're working for an architect, a supervisor who is licensed in the U.S., that counts as setting A.
Yeah.
So that's one that people sometimes overlook and aren't aware that they can count as setting A. Because of the way that question, they asked about logging hours. I want to talk for a minute about some of the conversations we were having ahead of time about what your practices are for logging hours and what you recommend for that process for people. Joe, Haley, either of you want to jump in on that?
You can
Sure.
start it.
So I'm in the middle of logging my hours still. So it's something I do every week. Personally, I'm pretty detailed about it. So every time I finish my timesheet at work, I go through and I apply those hours to the categories that I think they fall into. And I choose to do that every week just so that it stays really fresh in my mind. And the way we have our timesheet set up with Deltec, it's really helpful because it's portioned out by the piece of the project that you're working on, and then
The phase.
the phase. And then whatever specific portion you're working on, whether it's units or design or something like that. And then I keep a log of all of that, and then I review that with my supervisor ahead of time, and I submit my hours every 3 to 4 months, just so that they're not getting a ton of emails from me with emails and hours every week. And that works pretty well for me, but each person's going to have a little bit different of a system that works for them and works for their supervisor.
Well, the timesheet check-in is a good one. 2 weeks is it's long enough for you to have done something, but not too much time has gone by that you've forgotten what you did a couple weeks ago. And it's also a good check-in if the licensure candidate has a question about specific activity that may have happened over the course of the last couple of weeks, does that fall in, it was maybe a little unusual in the rest of the project, which category does that fall into? I certainly would encourage people to log those hours into the NCARB website as often as possible, but certainly tracking them in whatever form you want to. The asking for the report review is a different cycle, and I agree with that, but that doesn't have to be the same cycle as when
Right.
you're thinking about what you did. And it also, it's back to the same issue of communication. Supervisor knows really on an interval of every 2 weeks what that candidate is working on. So again, there should be no surprise by the time a review comes.
And I just want to chime in because you talked about doing it every week, and that's really important because if every 2 or 3 weeks you start to do it, you might forget that you have spent an hour doing code review. And at the end of a year, if you do code review for, every other week for at least an hour, that's 26 weeks 26 hours of code review that you have. But if you forget about that because you only do it every 3 weeks, then you are, 26 hours down, which you could have been that much closer on a category that was a little more rare in your time. So definitely make sure you're doing that as often as possible because those little snippets will build up over the course of 6 months to a year.
The increment is as low as a quarter of an hour, so
Yeah.
right? You don't have to worry if it wasn't even a full hour.
Right. All right. So Kyle asks, I'm just starting out in my pursuit of licensure, and I'm wondering what does and does not count toward recordable hours beyond what the AXP guidelines list in each category. Not quite sure what you mean there, but I would say that I guess I'll clarify one point that comes up periodically is that if you are in an education setting, I call it double dipping, right? If you're in a situation where you're getting credit in an academic setting, it's not eligible for AXP. If you're getting paid, and it's then it is eligible for AXP. There are only a limited number of exceptions where you can be volunteering or something because we do want you to be getting paid. So not getting academic credit and getting paid, chances are good that it will fall into one of those categories. And then there are, again, that list of selected categories where you could be doing volunteer work like the community-based design centers.
And I think too, I'm not quite sure if this is what the question's going towards, but I know I've struggled with this with my hours, is that sometimes you look at something you did and you're like, I have no idea where this belongs. And that's okay. I think for me, I try to think everything I'm doing in the office is something that's going to help me towards my practice as a future architect. So that should mean that almost every hour that you're working can fit into some category. There's going to be some that probably don't. There's always going to be some office work that that happens to fall on your plate or administrative work. But for the most part, those hours should fit somewhere. And if you don't know where they belong, ask your supervisor. But if you have a lot of questions about those hours, you can extend those to other people in your office. So if there's someone working on a project with you that's also gone through AXP, they might have a good idea of where you can put that hour. But use them all.
Right, we've had a couple of viewers asking us about reporting hours for several years all at once. What do we recommend for working with your supervisor to report 3 to 4 years of experience in one go? Well, first we recommend not doing it. As we've said we do want you to be reporting in a timely fashion because you will forget and your supervisor will forget. There are opportunities for you to report up to 5 years of past experience for partial credit. Anyone have any thoughts beyond that on how you might respond?
Well, I hate to admit this, but that's exactly what I did before the whole process was online. So it was still down to the paper forms. That being said, that wasn't a great thing to do. I definitely recommend if you are changing jobs to make sure you get that done before you leave because that's going to be even more difficult to try and track down that person. Half the time, I've had conversations with people where they that supervisor doesn't work at that firm anymore, and then they have no way of getting in touch with them. So it's really not a good idea. But if you have to, reach out, set up a coffee, have a conversation with them. Don't just stick their email into the form and hit send. You really need to prep them and have that conversation with them. And then when I did it, I had sat down with my boss and we kind of went through, okay, well here, I did this project and I thought that this kind of gave me this many hours, and then I did this project, and kind of go through each thing and give reasons why, because he was definitely apprehensive, like, you didn't spend all this time. And I'm like, actually I did, it's been 4 years. But again, it's not a good idea, and at this point it only counts for 50%. So if you don't book it now, if you don't log it now, you're essentially only getting 2 years of experience. So definitely don't wait. But if you have to.
Right, and if I've had conversations recently with people who did not realize that certain experiences were eligible. For example, their construction experience. Something like that, especially, where it is a little bit less focused on which, you still have to identify which AXP task you're working on, but it's a little easier to say in a construction setting, perhaps. Report those hours, those back hours, and get them counted. But we really, one of the key reasons we want you to do this in a timely fashion also is that it's important for you to be working with your supervisor and talking about how you can complete the different AXP tasks. With the program, we've really shifted to an emphasis not on just hours. We have to report hours, but the emphasis is on gaining experience, gaining competency in those task areas. And so we really want you to be looking at the AXP guidelines, reading the task, and saying, yes, I know how to do that, or I need to get experience knowing how to do that. I'd be interested in hearing your comments on how you assign or make available some of those more difficult tasks. Shauna had asked, particularly practice management as a difficult task. What is your experience, Joe, in finding opportunities for people in the different task areas?
Yeah, even before I start that, I'll just echo what I heard you say a second ago, which is it's not the raw number of hours that's important, it's that there should be understanding that comes during those hours. So the role as a supervisor is not just say, here, do this for 2 hours and then I'll sign off on it. There has to be some knowledge that's gained through that process, and that really falls, I think, a lot on the supervisor to say, is this a meaningful assignment or task? Is the candidate going to get something out of this so that he or she can build on it? Otherwise, it's just putting numbers on the paper. But in terms of how to get these more unusual experience, I'll give one concrete example, like contract negotiation or management. The licensure candidate's not often going to be involved in developing that the first time, but if a project goes into construction or into design and you're now working with a contract, there's no reason why the licensure candidate shouldn't have that contract available, and just to say, by the way, here's architect's role is described, here's what the owner's role is. So these are the things that we're going to be doing over the course of the project. Often that will lead to a discussion about, well, what's basic services and additional services? I thought we were doing all of these things, and then that leads into fees. So sometimes the discussion will go someplace that maybe I didn't even think to bring up. But that's all information that's there. Somebody can read it, ask questions about it, and they didn't have to be in charge of inventing it. And it also helps inform them over the course of the project. You're working towards this deadline because it's in the contract. You are putting this kind of information in the drawings because it's spelled out that way. So things start to synthesize a little bit.
Yeah, I think about specifically, you're talking about contracts. I think, giving them the opportunity to read the contract, because it's going to take you 30 minutes or more to read the contract. And maybe to put together the list of exhibits. If it's a contract for construction that you're putting together the list of exhibits, they can help gather that information and provide it to your attorney or whoever's actually writing the document.
Yeah, and this was actually something that before we got started here, we had been talking about is where do you get those contract management and like administration hours? And I know something that I've been able to do is, even though you may not be able to create a budget, that your supervisor or your boss might be able to walk you through one that they've created for your project. So it could be the same thing that maybe you're in construction documents and they can walk you through it now to say, okay, are we on budget, and kind of do it in a different way. Or they can do it at a beginning of the project and just walk you through it, how they did it, what that means for you when you're working on the project, and relate that back to the work you are doing.
Well, the budgeting is a great one. I've asked a couple of our licensure candidates to develop their own fee estimates. So not the ones, and we didn't use them directly in the proposal, but just in parallel to what we were doing. Just to say, think about the level of effort you think is going to be involved, you personally or our team, and then track it as you're working. That's always a huge surprise to people, that what the time it takes versus the time that you imagine that it would take, or even just coordination with other team, or did we hit the deadline, or how long is this going to. So that's a good one, and it counts, right? You've gone through the exact same process, even if your information was not in the official document.
And also, I would say, ask to sit in on some of those meetings. You can sit in the back and kind of take it all in. Maybe take the notes, because that's a really great way to really kind of understand what's happening, and then have a recap or a debrief after, and say, hey, I had some questions about this. Can you explain X, Y, and Z to me? That might be a great way to at least get your foot in the door and gain some of those hours.
Yeah.
We have a fun question. Please discuss the applicability of work performed remotely and the ability to qualify for AXP. Direct supervision can also be performed over the internet. I think there's sort of an intended question mark after that. I would say yes, it can. But what are your thoughts on working remotely? Have you done that with anyone yet?
Not specifically, no. But I would say, I think this is where the question is going, is that there are people who, for example, would start at a firm, and then for whatever reason they need to move away. A spouse takes a job someplace and they move with them. But they would like to maintain a relationship. And the kind of work that they're doing, it's possible to work remotely. Firms like to maintain relationship with people they already know and can work well with. At that point, you've established the relationship and you're just continuing it in a different form. I think it would be more challenging if you were trying from the very beginning to start something remotely where there was no relationship already in place. That would be unusual, and I'm not quite sure how that would work, but you know what? We're all creative folks. That sort of thing shouldn't be an obstacle either.
Yeah, and I think there's ways to work around it too. I think someone that works in an office right now and is working on my AXP, I have a lot of questions, like all the time. So I think having access to someone to answer those questions is really important, but I think there's ways to do it. Like similar to what you said, we're creative. Maybe you have you just have Skype running or something all day, and when you have questions, you speak up and you let them know that you have a question about something. Because I think as long as you're working those hours and someone knows what you're doing and how you're doing those, and if you have questions, they're being answered, I think those are valid hours to be reported.
Yeah, if you are, we are in a little bit different setting here at NCARB, but we're very well equipped to do those through online chat, through Skype, through meetings. But I know even when I practiced in a firm, we were working with shared review documents. You do your red lines through an online service that then everybody can comment on and view, and you're working across multiple offices or with engineers outside. So I absolutely think it's possible to have direct supervision remotely, but you do have to be sure that you're in a firm that's set up for it and is intentional about it, and that you as well are intentional about making sure that you're getting good supervision, you're getting your questions answered, you're having someone check your work. So we have had a couple questions from individuals working as sole proprietors or independent contractors. Ooh. Are there any suggestions for completing AXP while working for yourself if you're also working for architects on projects? See me after class, as one of my high school professors used to say. That's really, you need to be under the direct supervision and charge of an architect for your A experience hours. If you have sort of a specific contract circumstance, again, it's a complicated that's a complicated situation, and I think you probably need to be looking in the other category, and also considering probably going back to work for an architect so that you can get those supervision experiences.
Yeah, I mean, the only other thing that I would add to that, we were talking about this even before the webinar started, but on a good day, our profession is incredibly complex. I mean, one of the things I've talked with licensure candidates about when they come in is we just start listing off all the things. And one day, one of the interns said, we have to know a lot of stuff. And it really is true. It's unending. And so there's real advantage in mentorship, being around people who know more than you do, not because they're smarter or more talented, they've just been around longer. Then you don't have to find it out for yourself the first time. You can take advantage of this experience. So that the mentorship or being in a network or in an office, it has real value. And there are obviously a lot of circumstances that may affect that, but I think just to reiterate what you were saying, Jeremy, that seek that out, because this is not a process intended for you to go alone. It really should be a community that pulls you along.
Absolutely.
I think one of my favorite experiences was working for, I worked in Columbus office of NBBJ, a large firm, and I, as an intern and just coming out of my third year in school, sat over the cubicle from one of the senior principals. And I got to listen in on all of his phone calls with large hospitals all over the world. And take your headphones out, as some of you have probably been told, because you can listen in and learn so much, even if it's just about how to present yourself and how to guide a conversation. That was incredible that I got to sit over the wall from him. What are some tips? This is another question from our audience. What are some tips for candidates following a non-traditional career path? I have some thoughts on that, but some of you might as well. You followed a somewhat non-traditional path.
I do have a non-traditional path, but I did the traditional path, got licensed, and then left. I think a license is probably the most important, personally, the most important thing I've ever done. It has opened up so many doors for me that I never, ever would have expected to be available. And at the end of the day, I am a licensed architect. I do not ever have to sit for an exam again for architecture. But it's done. It's a credential I have. It's a credential I will always maintain, and it gives me a little credibility when when I go into schools of architecture or I go into firms. I can still relate because I've practiced. But the non-traditional path for me, architecture. I like the business side of it. I like the networking side of it, and our profession has so many opportunities for. So many different and varied paths through the profession that I think an architecture background and an architecture degree and license can open many, many doors regardless of whether you want to, what you want to pursue. I think there are a lot of different paths for people, whether you really like designing or whether you really like detailing and specs, or maybe you like more of the business development side of things. There are so many different things that we can pursue in this profession, and so I would just encourage you to continue pursuing your passion, and that is what will lead you to become successful. If you are not excited about the work you do, you will never really kind of grow and really kind of find what gives you joy. So I don't know if that answers the question or not.
I know this did you have something on this? I know this is a topic that's been coming up in a number of areas recently. I heard it a couple of times at an event I was at over the weekend with people wanting to go directly into education or directly into game design or a number of different fields that are becoming a popular alternative. But I also agree that the architectural credential of licensure is very valuable. And one of our, was talking with one young candidate who was here a couple of weeks ago, and she was emphasizing how she's not yet licensed, but she was emphasizing how in her work in nonprofits and political activism and government boards, how it really matters in those settings for her. As she would tell it, particularly as a woman, it matters for her to have the credential, and the importance of getting there. One of the tips that I would give to someone interested in a non-traditional path is to particularly if you're thinking about going into construction or something else that is likely going to pay more, is don't get out there and get spoiled, by starting your career at a construction company, because it might be hard for you to come back and pick up your required hours in setting A. So get your setting A hours as quickly as you can. Work for a licensed architect. Get those setting A hours first if you're thinking about a non-traditional career.
And I think that goes back to some of the questions we had before about A setting and O setting and how to log hours that have happened over a period of time. I think what Jeremy's touching on is really important, is that if obviously we believe in licensure in the process since we're all involved in it, but I think if there's any thought in your mind as a candidate or someone that's graduated from architecture school or in architecture school, if there's any thought for you that you want to have a license or you want to practice architecture, that getting those hours and logging them now is going to be as easy as it gets. So for me, right out of school, logging the hours now is the easiest time for me to do it. The farther you get into your career, it's going to become more difficult. And if you want to take a turn in your career, it's going to be even more difficult to get those A setting hours. It's definitely not impossible. Anyone can do it, but it's going to be easiest directly out of school.
And we see a lot of students who really want to be proactive and kind of start their own firms and really get into like community impact and that sort of thing. And I think, just as you mentioned, you want to get that out of the way as quickly as possible so that you can go and pursue those interests and passions of yours. That license is only going to serve you to be able to do whatever you want. And if things change in the future, like, every 7 to 10 years, another change is going to happen. And so setting yourself up for anything that could come your way is the best thing that you can do for your future, regardless of what it ends up being.
Wait, what's the 7 to 10 years thing you're talking about?
I've heard that like every 7 to 10 years, you make a change. I think I spent 8 years in the profession, and I am now 6 years in the association world. And I don't know, there's like this.
It's kind of like your taste buds. They change every once in a while. It's okay.
The 7-year itch.
And the other thing where I thought maybe you were also heading is that the economy is cyclical. The construction economy is cyclical. And so 7 to 10 years, or maybe a number close to that, is a good idea to keep in mind in the ebbs and flows of job opportunities and time to break out on your own and start new firms. I've known of a lot of firms that have been started by people in recessions. When they lose their job or something happens, and they actually start their firm then.
And if you're prepared and you've gotten everything taken care of, you're just setting yourself up to have success in that next phase.
Jeremy, I'll pick up quickly on one thing that Kimberly was talking about, is this value of the achievement of the licensure. Sometimes we struggle as a profession with getting recognition, or we feel like, the laws, regulations are kind of against us, but a licensed architect actually has a meaning. And even if people don't quite understand what it is that we do, it's still being able to say that that's what you are and that you're licensed. And you'll notice that especially when you get into settings where you're not there in a professional capacity, you're a community representative, or you sit on a board, suddenly you bring a perspective to the table that nobody else has. And I think it opens your eyes to saying this skill set that we all take for granted, from school all the way through the profession, not a lot of other people have in that combination. And so we start to become very valuable. AIA National has always had this big push for citizen architects, so getting us in non-professional service capacities out in other places, whether it's politics or community service. And that works when people have an interest in those areas. They bring the credentials, they bring their experience. It can only serve our profession better. More people see what we do, the kind of skills we bring to the table, the benefit that we can bring. And so the non-traditional is actually hugely important for our profession. If we were only one part of this, we're not really serving in the way we could potentially.
Great. I'm going to ask you one more question here, and then give you the opportunity to make a closing remark. Thank you to everyone who's sent us questions. But we talked briefly in our preparations for this about differences between large firms and small firms, and I think most of our experience is actually in smaller offices, maybe of large firms. But what thoughts, as you think about supervision and how that looks different in those two settings, any thoughts on that you'd like to share?
I think being in a small office right now, I think having a close connection with your supervisor is really important. Everything goes back to the communication part. That being comfortable with them, they understand who you are as a person or what your goals are long term. And I think that applies to any size firm. So it might be a little bit more difficult in a larger office to find that, but there's nothing wrong with talking to 3 or 4 people that are potential supervisors and kind of interviewing them. I know before this we kind of talked like it's okay to ask them out to coffee and be like, let's have a chat about what it means for you to be my supervisor. Then have like little interviews almost. And that goes for both sides, both as a supervisor and as a candidate.
I would echo that. The experience is going to be varied all over the place, not just firm size, but culture, the individual's personalities involved. And in addition to the communication is ultimately when you have the opportunity, you'd like to find the right fit. I mean, sometimes a job is a job, but ultimately you're really looking for a place where you feel comfortable, you feel like you're contributing, it's a nurturing environment. And I think if you can be on the lookout for that in the beginning, one of the ways you can help yourself is by preparing. So in interviews, as you identify the firms you'd like to work for, you know a little bit about them, their work. Then you come to the interview and you start to talk about, well, here's where I'm interested in going. How would the firm plug into that, or is that something that you would also be interested in participating in? So you start to set those expectations early, and I think that is a little bit independent of firm size. Certainly, firms of many different sizes are adopting methods that are smaller. You might even say family-oriented, team-oriented, because they know that's a good way to work. And so any of these sorts of expectations that licensure candidates are going to bring to the table, I think you have the opportunity to find the right fit, hopefully.
Yeah, and I think emerging professionals, students and emerging professionals have something to add. You have value, you have lots of new and innovative things you are learning in school, and you have just as much to offer the firm as they have to offer to you. And then keeping in mind that your supervisor, I feel like all of the firms I've worked for feels like a family. And so all of my supervisors have turned into mentors. Mentors to this day that I still reach out to and say, hey, can I run something by you? What do you think about this? I'm thinking about making this change. Do you think that's a good idea? Do you think that's a good fit for me? What are your thoughts? Because they have seen how I've grown. They've seen, they know me, and they're just a really great resource to bounce ideas off of. So that person who is your supervisor at the beginning may turn out to be a lifelong mentor. So if you can, continue to nourish those relationships because they will become invaluable as you grow.
Okay. So last chance, any last minute thoughts that you want to share on the topic of supervision before we wrap up?
I'm just going to say it again, just communicate with everybody about what you're trying to do. I think sometimes it's really easy, especially as someone new in an office, to get caught up and sometimes to doubt yourself with how many questions you're asking or what you do and don't know, and what is what I'm doing really the practice of architecture? And it definitely is. If you're working in an office and you're getting those hours, you put them to good use. So I think having great communication with your supervisor is the best thing you can do to set yourself up for success with your AXP.
Great.
Yeah, I'd say on the supervisor side, not only is this the mentorship and supervision, bringing up the next generation, absolutely vital. We don't do it, we don't have the next generation. But on the other hand, it's also a great honor. We should think of it that way. And I think if supervisors lose sight of that and think of it more as an administrative task that they have to keep up with, they're missing the opportunity to say, I'm able to impart a little bit of knowledge. The only difference between me and this licensure candidate is I've been doing this longer. So I know a little bit more information about this. If I can pass that on, then when you see that person leave your office, graduate from school, move on to something else, and you see how they thrive and develop, and you know you had a tiny role to play in that, that's hugely rewarding. And I personally, I take a lot of satisfaction in that. And I think I'd love to see more supervisors really embrace that and say, like almost seek out candidates. I'd love to do this. And I think it does happen quite a bit, but really making sure that the licensure candidates know that you are that enthusiastic so that they don't have to feel like, I'm making this person do it, because it's great. And anyway, I'm honored to do it, and I hope to continue for a while.
And I would say for those newly entering the professions, don't get discouraged. There are a lot of different firms out there, and there are a lot of different ways that you can practice. And so don't get discouraged. It may not be exactly what you thought the profession was. And you can either make your own path, you can continue find the appropriate firm for you, but don't get discouraged. Always make sure you're asking questions. Bring your voice to the table. Your voice is important, and there may be new things that the firm is willing, you may open their eyes up to something new. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is ask questions and don't get discouraged within the first couple months, because it will get better. You have to pay your dues. It's just kind of part of the profession, and you need to learn. Like you don't know everything when you get out of school, and there's a lot of things about how a building is constructed that you need to learn. But those are things that we are willing to teach you, and we are excited for you to learn and grow and kind of start contributing to projects. So,
Yes, thank you. There's a reason that we have both education and experience requirements. They are both part of preparing you to be a licensed architect and to develop those competencies that are necessary for you to be licensed. So thank you all again for joining us. I think we had a really fantastic panel, some great expertise, some coming from these folks, and some great wisdom. For you all at home or at the office or wherever you're watching on your phone, please be sure to use the AXP guidelines to guide your process as a candidate or as a supervisor to understand the tasks that you're trying to complete and gain expertise in.